Hey everybody. So today kind of wanted to do a little intro to web services in LabVIEW. So if you've used web services, this is basically a way that you can, through LabVIEW, create like REST endpoints that other code, whether that be LabVIEW, be a web page, be different programming languages can call and they can execute your LabVIEW code. It also has some capabilities for hosting like files. So, if you have like HTML and, custom JavaScript and, whatnot for like a web application, this can actually host all of that and then, provide it to, clients who connect over like a URL. So, just wanted to kind of do an intro, the fundamentals of web services so you can start setting these up yourselves. So if we go to my computer and go to new, we get a whole bunch of options, but there's this one right here for web services. So that's the one that we want to select. It's going to ask us for the name we want to assign to our web service. You do want this name to have some meaning because this is going to be part of all of your URL mapping for anything, any of your endpoints here. So I'm just going to call it demo. But yeah, as we basically start building some REST endpoints, this is going to be part of that URL, and I'll show you that. So it auto-populates with these two folders under here. So we have a startup VIs and a web resources. So startup VIs, basically this is code that's going to run when this web service starts. So I can, if I want to, add a new VI and define what I want it to do. So just initialization type stuff I can include here. These aren't required. You don't need to have startup VIs. A lot of times I don't. And then we have this web resources. So I can add a new VI. I'm going to add one here and show you what this looks like. So this is where we can add our different kind of static methods that will be basically REST endpoints, if that makes sense. So I can create as many of these as I want, and basically they're loaded into memory. And then when a request is made to this endpoint, it's going to execute this code. And whatever it's supposed to do, it can return data, it can just do something and return a status, saying okay, etc. So it does auto-populate with this LabVIEW web service request. And so if we right-click here, we can go to the web services palette. So these are all the functions you can use for interacting with web services. Likewise, you can also access all of this. So if I go to connectivity, web services, I have the same things here. So you can find either one. Depending on what you're trying to do, there's different functions here, right? So, read, I've got, read form data. So when I'm trying to read a form, post data, I use this one a lot. When I set up a method to be like an HTTP post and someone is writing to the post buffer, this will actually output what that post buffer is so that I can interact with it. There's request variables. So you can include variables in your HTTP request, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a sec. And you can basically look up variables by name and extract those values. And then based off the different hosting you do for your web service, and I'll talk about these different options again in just a sec. There's some different sections. So if you're using NI web server, you can basically get the authentication to validate, who's connected and what do they have access to. Application web server, this is a little bit older, but yeah, you've got some functions for kind of authentication, for sessions, for cookies, stuff like that. And yeah. And then same thing for output. So you can use these things to set headers, to set MIME type, set HTTP code, right? So if I want to return a certain, HTTP code, right, I can just drop this down. And yeah, it's already kind of mapped with the default ones. So I could basically have this selected based off of some code, right? So if some code doesn't throw any errors, then I want to return 200, but if it returns an error, maybe I want to include something else. Or, if someone has tried to access this and they don't have permission to, maybe I can return like a 403 forbidden, right? Or something like that. So you can kind of do stuff like that. And basically you're just wiring that in to there, and it will automatically be included in the response back, in your header back or whatever. And yeah, some information about your web service, just getting attributes of it and whatnot. So that's kind of the palette. So in this VI, I can do basically whatever I want. I can drop any LabVIEW functions in here. So for this example, I'm just going to create a simple add. We'll call this guy A, and we'll call this guy B. Sweet. And then we'll just call this result. So one of the really cool things with these is they work directly with the connector pane of your VIs. So I can go here and I can link my A and my B, and I can also link my indicator. And what this is going to do, so for the indicators, basically whatever indicators I've wired up, they're going to all be bundled together in a cluster, and that cluster is going to be converted to JSON, and that's going to be returned to whatever endpoint called this. So in my case here, I'm just going to have a single cluster that contains one element or one item that is the result. But I could have all sorts of different stuff of different data types, etc. And it's basically just going to cluster it all together and then convert that to JSON. And then anything can just extract that JSON. So it's actually super simple. And this works across languages, right? So, here's a float. Well, guess what? You can go do an HTTP GET to this method and pass in, from Python or whatever, and now you've got that number in Python. So really cool. For the controls, it doesn't work quite the same, but we can include these as variables in our request. And I'll show you in just a sec how we can do that. That way we can pass in these parameters that we want to add and return the result from any programming language. Could be a desktop application, or it could be like a web page or something like that. So really pretty cool. So let's just call this add. Sweet. So we now have our first method in here. If I right click on this, you can see I can change. Everything defaults to a get. If I wanted that to be a post or a put or a delete, I can just change that. And it's just going to change which method you need to use to call that endpoint. Really simple, really cool. We do have this show method URL here. So what it's going to do is it's going to show you the method, basically the URL you need to use for this REST endpoint. So HTTP, this right here, 127.0.0.1 just means localhost. So that's the IP address for localhost. So if you're connecting from somewhere else, you'll want to make sure that you change this to either the IP address of where this is running or the DNS name, and then the port that you're running this on. And this is going to change based off of where you're hosting this. So you can do local debugging. That's on port 8001, application, web server, or NI web server. And I'm going to talk about those in just a sec, so don't worry if you're confused on those. And then our next, we're going to do a slash, and then it's going to be the name of our web service, which I name my web service demo. And then the method we want to call. So I'm calling the add method. And then it fills in the blanks basically for you for how to do the query variables. So, you add a question mark, and then we're going to include the variable name equals and the value. And then an and sign, and then another control equals and the value. And we can do another and for however many controls we want to write the value to. And we don't have to write to all of them either. So if we, for example, A and B, default value for both is just 0. If I just want to do, B is 5 and I just want to leave A as 0, well, guess what? Then it's going to do 5 plus 0. Works great. So this is the exact format you need to use for making your REST requests from whatever other language. And we can do this from LabVIEW, and I can show you that. So yeah, that's kind of setting that up. Let's go look at some of the stuff here. If we go open our web service, this will take just a second. Some of the settings that we have in here. Sweet. So here I can edit the name of my web service. I can also update the version of it. I can also, so for hosting basically static documents, so HTML and whatnot, and I'm going to show you how to set that up as well in just a sec. I can also set permissions for how that's going to work. There's some advanced settings. The main thing I sometimes turn on is this enable remote debugging. So if you're using the local debugging web hosting, you can turn this on, and it actually makes your debug server become remotely accessible so that you can connect to it from another computer. We have this HTTP method VI settings. So this is going to show all of the different methods in our web service, what their method is, and then basically what additional URL mappings are on top of the base mapping, which is kind of cool. You can also go down here and I can change the methods. I can also, by default, it's going to use standard URL mapping and include the VI name. So standard being HTTP IP address or DNS : the port number / the name of the web service / the name of the method. If we want to use something different, we can uncheck that and we can change it however we want. So if you wanted to change the way those endpoints are mapped, you can do that. This output type. So like I told you, it's basically taking all of our indicators, bundling those together into a cluster, and then sending that as JSON. That's the default. If we want to, we can also send that different ways. So we can send that as HTML, we can send it as text, and we can send it as XML. The most common though is you're going to use JSON. But if you're working with another developer who really likes working in XML or something, you can switch that to XML, and it's all handled automatically. You don't need to manage that. But JSON is by far the most common for web services, web applications, web programming. JSON is by far the most heavily used. And there's also, you can set it up for streaming so that you can use this in basically a way to stream data instead of just send data when called. And yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So for if I'm hosting on the NI web server, there are a list of permissions based on how my NI web server is configured. For application web server, I can create additional permissions and I can require API keys. And by default, this is going to load the VI at startup and keep it in memory so that it's really quick. When a call's made, it's already in memory. It can just execute. Sitemap, again, is just showing all of these methods, what they are, and the URL mappings. And then there's some additional NI web server privilege stuff that you can set up here. So that's kind of that. I wanted to show also, if we right click on our web server, we can go to add public content folder. So this is going to ask us where we want to load that public content from. I actually don't have an example set up, but so yeah, this isn't what you would actually want to load, just for demoing purposes. But this is a way that I can basically add custom web applications to this web service as well. So those could be web applications that I've written in GWeb or React, or it could be Django, it could be all sorts of different stuff, right? Flask, etc. And I can basically serve that HTML documents up from here. So I can just go add them in, and now that's also built in. So not only do I have like REST endpoints, but I can also have an actual web page being hosted this way, which is really cool. But yeah, in my case here, I actually don't have some. I actually will be making a video on showing how you can create a simple web app in GWeb and include that in your LabVIEW web services. So and they do talk together pretty nice and easily. It's pretty easy to set up, so I will show you that. But yeah, for some reason my add VI disappeared. I must have accidentally deleted it. So let me recreate that real quick. Sweet. Okay, and now I'm going to show you guys some of the different ways that you can host this. So as you've seen, as I've been digging through some of the options and whatnot, there is basically, let me change this. There's actually 3 options for how we're going to host this. I guess technically there's 4. Sweet. Okay. So if I go right click on my web service, I have a couple different options to start this. So the first one I want to talk about, if you go to application web server, there is this start debug server. So this is your local debugging. This is on port 8001. So this is a way I can basically just, click this. It's going to take just a sec, start up my web service. It's going to warn me and say, hey, this is running on port 8001. I click OK, and now my web service is running. If I go try to open this VI, you can see that it is waiting to run. So it's in memory, it's loaded, it's just waiting to run. So that's all you need to do to start it up locally. Now, that's not going to start up automatically. It's really just meant for you to be trying out your web service and testing it and whatnot. So I'm going to create a VI not part of my web service. And we can connect to this just using the HTTP functions. So, and another cool thing you can do here is I can click show method URL, and it gives me the full URL. So it makes it real easy to just copy that over, paste that, and let's add a value there and a value there. Okay, so let's populate our headers, populate our body, and now let's go make a call to this. So I go run this, and you can see I got back, and these are just the default headers. If I want my web server to write additional headers, I showed you guys how you can do that. It's not hard. This is kind of the default. And you can see it returned this JSON with my result equals 5, which is correct for adding 2 plus 3. So that's all you need to do for your gets. Posts work very much the same way. Just using a post buffer, and you'll use that read post buffer or post data function that I showed you. So really simple, really cool, I think. So to stop our debug server, I just have this stop debug server. So now I can go back in, I can edit my VIs, I can, if there was some error in my code. So that's really just meant for testing your code out. Your next option is you can go to application web server, and there's this publish option. So this will actually publish it to the application web server. This is a full-blown web server, so once you publish this, when the system that this is running on reboots, it's going to relaunch your web service automatically. So you don't need to manage that. It'll kind of be managed automatically. You can go to manage web server, and there you can see kind of a list of what things are running, what their status is, and also do a little bit of administration. So the application web server exists, but it is no longer recommended. The NI web server is the one that's meant to be used now. It's the most modern, uses the best practices in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of performance, etc. Yeah. The application web server is still around, but NI web server is preferred. Now, if you're interested in running web pages on your embedded devices, like a Compact Rio or a MyRio or something like that, then you have to use the application web server. You can host that right on those RT targets. And I'm going to create a video showing that, how you can basically, because most of your Compact Rios, right, they're headless. And you're creating some sort of network communication with some sort of client application to interact with it. Well, you can also really easily create a web page and it could actually be hosted on the RT target itself. So you just connect to a URL in Chrome, in Edge, whatever browser you want, and then boom, you have your interface. You didn't need to install anything. Anyone can pull it up and monitor it. Really cool. So if you are using RT targets, you do have to use application web server. Now, the start up here is going to start the actual NI web server. So this is the one that's recommended to be used for deploying. So this is, if you're deploying this to like a, somewhere on like an enterprise network for your organization, this is what you should be using. And there is also a configuration GUI for the NI web server. So you can go in and you can say, hey, I want you to use these, certificates, etc. Or I can create different users with different groups and, control permissions that way. So that's really how it's meant to be used. Now, there are, like I said, local debugging, and there's this published for the actual application web server. Now, there is one other way that you can actually host these web services, and that is going to be that you can build them into your other applications. So if I go and say I want to create a new exe, for example, so this is going to take just a sec, and I could have other code as well, right? So I could have a full-blown exe, but I also could be including a web service in that exe. So, maybe, I need to go copy over, different stuff, but I'm including this web service. I can just go here and say, I want you to include this web service in your application. I can specify how it's going to be hosted. And for NI web server, you basically have no option. It's just hosted the way that NI web server is set up on wherever this is running. Now, if you're using application web server, I can also specify which port I want to use. I can enable SSL. I can configure my certificates and stuff like that, so I have good security. So that is another way that you can host these web services. So that's kind of it for our crash course. Like I said, if you're interested in learning more about web services, I will be doing another video specifically on how to take a GWeb app and host it in here using public content. And I'm also going to show how you can run a web page on a compact Rio. So how we can basically create a web UI GUI for our compact Rio, which runs headlessly normally. So really kind of cool, I think. So if you're interested, be sure to tune back in and we'll talk about this a little more. But thank you for tuning in today.
Canon Controls is your gateway to mastering LabVIEW. Dive into programming for data acquisition, industrial communications, and manufacturing automation. Explore how to enhance your projects with cybersecurity best practices. Join the journey to elevate your skills and secure your systems with every episode.